Compressors and limiters are dynamic-based processors that alter the overall dynamic range of a source, and they really focus on the attack, decay, sustain, and release. They really move those pieces of the envelope. Compressors are often used to create more consistent dynamics, and limiters are often used to maximize final output of a source. But they can actually be used in a number of different ways. So, I mean, those are really generalized terms. I feel like there's a million ways to use compressors and limiters, and there's a lot of ways to use them almost inversely, in various ways if you're being artistic with them. And so I kind of like line that out with two different ways. There's functional purpose of a compressor and a limiter, and then there's the artistic purpose of the compressor and limiter. So like the functional purpose of a compressor is to give us more consistent dynamics. Functional use of a limiter is to limit what that final output is so that we're not clipping in any way a lot of times. But if I'm using it artistically as a male vocalist, I use limiters on my voice to give me edge, and to emphasize breathing, to emphasize transition, to give it a lot more grit. I use compressors to give it the oomph, and sometimes I use compressors in order to even just hear more of the room. Actually, let's take a look at that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the snare drum here. The snare drum is doing something real chill, but I want to actually make it more aggressive. I want to actually pump out a little bit more of that. There's a couple ways to do it. And actually, I'm going to start off with I'm going to go to an 1176, and we can just use the Bomb Factory stock one that comes in with Pro Tools. And I'm actually going to take one of these presets and go to pump, and let's listen to the snare drum real quickly. So what's going to happen is compressors, in the artistic form with utilizing compressors and limiters, if we move the release time can actually either tighten up the tone and make a lot of the releases seem shorter and maybe more timely, or we can emphasize them and stretch them out and get a lot more of the room. And when we get a lot more of the room, we actually get this built-in reverb. Like we get a reverberant tone because we're hammering down on the compressor. And when the signal source is not in the compressor anymore, it's actually just picking up the tail end of the release and sometimes dead air, and that's where it's trying to draw it out. It's bringing it up, and because it's bringing it up in the mix, it makes that tail just feel elongated. So it has that vibe to it. So you notice the difference there. Listen to the difference as I start to move the release. And so, this isn't necessarily a full-blown tutorial on what compressors and limiters are in terms of every function of how they work, but as an overall just kind of summary of them, I think one of the most exciting things about utilizing compression and limiting is the attack and release speed and what it does to the overall ADSR for that source. And you notice we're watching the meter go from not moving much at all to hopping along with the rhythm, and it kind of gives it more feel. Now, there's a point at which we cannot get away with that in building a mix, where if it's just moving too much up and down, it's too distracting to make the mix have like this sustainable rhythmic floor. So that's where we find that sweet spot. We start opening everybody else up, bringing everybody else in, find out how much flux we can get away with. Yeah, and we see that, okay, wow, that's a lot more subtle now, and it fits the mix. That actually worked a lot better. What's also great about just even the way the drummer is playing this feel is that it's a top mic, bottom mic, and then a Glenn Johns stereo overhead, and it just makes it so that every time he rolls into that you feel it move left to right. Like it feels like the snare is always moving, but there's no automated movement. It literally is just capturing the positioning of what he's playing. And as we emphasize that, you can hear it flux more, and we can really dim it down if it's like, there's just too much movement. just putting a compressor on there and being able to move this back and forth really does that for us. Notice we're laying into it a lot, so the meter's actually compressing a lot. And that's how we really get to that overall feel.